What's going on, everybody? Today is May 20th of 2023, and welcome to this, the 52nd edition of the Superstream. My name is Derek, and we got plenty to talk about today. We're going to kick things off by talking about the passing of really one of the most famous professional wrestlers in history, a man who helped shape the sport as it is today, superstar Billy Graham, who died at the age of 79 earlier this week. Yesterday, we learned that one of the most legendary players in NFL history, Jim Brown, who is considered by many to be the greatest running back in the history of the sport, also passed away at 87, and we'll talk about that. Another big story this week was the royal escape. Harry and Meghan were in New York City for an event, and apparently had to run away in their car from some paparazzi, which was an alarming story, given how Harry's mother, Diana, passed away back in 1997. So welcome back to this, the 52nd edition of the Superstream. You'll notice that the phrase Superstream equals 142 in reverse Gematria. The word Gematria, also 142. And in the alphabetic order, this is the sum of my name, Derek Decory, 142. On this channel, we look at the world through the lens of the ancient mystics, who believed that everything we experience in this world can be quantified through numbers. This not only includes the numerology of dates on the calendar, but also the gematria of our names, as determined by the numerical values associated with each letter. This all begins with simple English gematria, which is the most basic cipher I teach. This cipher simply numbers the alphabet 1 through 26 relative to each letter's position in the alphabet. You'll notice that the words simple, English, and gematria all sum to 74. Now, if this was the only relevant cipher, things might be a little bit too simple. So we typically look at the base 4 gematria ciphers, which are all based in ordinal. The reverse method simply flips the alphabetic order around so that Z is assigned 1 through A is 26. The reduction methods, also known as Pythagorean gematria, take each double-digit number and add the digits together down to a single digit. So let's take the letter P, for example, in the alphabetic order. This is the 16th letter. Well, if you add the digits, 1 plus 6, you get 7. And in reduction, the letter P is worth 7. So let's get started. And today we're going to talk about the death of Billy Graham, for starters. And what I'm going to focus on for this decode is the name Billy Graham. Superstar Billy Graham is not the only famous person with that name. For many decades, Reverend Billy Graham was a pastor to several presidents in the Oval Office and was really one of the most famous reverends in his time. And I always thought it was strange that we had this guy, Superstar Billy Graham, a former WWE champion, a man who dethroned the legendary Bruno Sammartino, that I always thought it was interesting that he shared a name with the Reverend. And as it turns out, as it always does in the language of gematria, there are significant numerical connections between these two men. So first of all, let's take a look at the date that each man was born. The Reverend Billy Graham was born on November 7th of 1918. Superstar Billy Graham was born on June 7th of 1943. Now, if you're familiar with my work, you may immediately notice that these two men were born on the same day of the month, the 7th. And yes, this is very relevant. But first, check out the multiplicative numerology of their birthdays. Billy Graham was born on November 7th, the Reverend, which is the date that leaves 54 days on the Gregorian calendar. Also, if you multiply all the digits in his birthday, you get a product of 504. This also works with Superstar Billy Graham's birthday. 6 times 7 times 4 times 3 yields a product of 504. In the reduction method of gematria, The name Billy Graham sums to 54. You'll also notice in the alphabetic order, this name equals 108, which is the first multiple of 54. 54 plus 54, summing to 108. Superstar Billy Graham died on May 17th, 3 days ago. May 17th is the 137th day of the year, which leaves 228 days on the calendar. Using the standard 26-letter alphabet, the word superstar sums to 137, dead on the 137th day of the year. Another significant Gematria cipher I talk about is called Sumerian Gematria. This takes the standard alphabetic order and multiplies it by 6, which is considered to be the most significant number of time. Time being credited to the Sumerians, or the quantification of it, perhaps. Notice how the word superstar also equals 822 in this Sumerian method, lining up with May 17th, leaving 228 days in the year. When Reverend Billy Graham died, it was on the date February 21st of 2018. Now, what's so interesting about that birthday, or that date? Well, February 21st fell 106 days after his own birthday. Furthermore, February 21st is also 106 days before Superstar Billy Graham's birthday. In the reverse alphabetic order, Superstar equals 106. Again, the Reverend dying 106 days after his birthday and 106 days before the wrestler's birthday. How about one more cipher I teach, also based in the alphabetic order? This is called capitals mixed. You'll notice it's still 1 through 26, A through Z, but small letters are placed in between the capital letters. Using this method, the word superstar sums to 273, measuring from the death of the Reverend Billy Graham to the death of Superstar Billy Graham is exactly 273 weeks. The pro wrestler died in Phoenix, Arizona, which is also where he was born. Now, Phoenix has a popular nickname. It's known as the Valley of the Sun. The last time the sun was blocked by the moon over the United States was back in August of 2017. I call this the first Great American Eclipse. Billy Graham died 2,095 days after the Great American Eclipse. Using the reverse alphabetic order, Superstar Billy Graham equals 295. Now, of course, in numerology, the 0 is dropped, so this represents the same number. But what makes this more fascinating is that if you measure between the birthday of Reverend Billy Graham to the wrestler Billy Graham, you find they were born exactly 295 months apart. Let's just quickly plug these birthdays in here so you can see. These two men born 295 months apart, just like how Superstar Billy Graham is 295. What also makes this interesting is that we find their birthdays are also separated by 212 days on the calendar. Well, the Reverend Billy Graham, his full name was William Franklin Graham, which in the alphabetic order sums to 212. The wrestler's real name was Elridge Coleman. Notice how Elridge Coleman has matching digits with William Graham, 127 and 80. However, his full name, Elridge Wayne Coleman, had Sumerian gematria of 1170, 117, This stands out because the Reverend was born on November 7th, the date written 11/7. Notice how the Reverend has primary birth numerology of 79. And 79 was the age that superstar Billy Graham died at. In Latin Gematria, which is what I consider to be the most significant of the extended methods, this cipher uses an older form of English with the more modern characters J, V, and W placed at the end. In this method, superstar equals 706, and this also connects to superstar's birthday, the 7th of June, written 7/6 in most parts of the world. So when we talk about gematria and mysticism, this is basically how it works. Two men with the exact same name, Billy Graham, therefore carrying the same numeric vibrations throughout their lives. And sure enough, their births, their deaths, heavily connected by the numbers. Next up, we're going to look at the passing of running back Jim Brown. Now, it's noteworthy, of course, that the man named Jim Brown spent his entire playing career in the NFL with the Cleveland Browns. And the Cleveland Browns got their name after their first coach, Paul Brown. So next up, I'm going to talk about how the death of Jim Brown is synced up with the numbers of Cleveland, and also Paul Brown, who was Jim Brown's coach for a short amount of time in the early parts of his career. First, let's start off by mentioning Jim Brown's birthday, February 17th. February 17th is the date that leaves 317 days on the calendar. 317 is a prime number, which is very significant to numerology. Prime numbers are only divisible by 1 and itself. 317 is the 66th prime number. The phrase NFL has Latin gematria of 66. So does running back in reverse reduction, 66. Jim Brown, of course, considered to be the best running back in the game's history by many. Well, Jim Brown died on May 18th. And this year, May 18th fell on a date with primary numerology of 66. 5 plus 18 plus 20 plus 23. May 18th is also the date that leaves 227 days in the year. 227 is another significant prime number. You'll see that 227 is the 49th prime. Both Jim Brown and NFL have base gematria of 49. The namesake of the Cleveland Browns, Paul Brown, passed away back in the year 1991. If you measure between Paul Brown's death to the death of Jim Brown, you get 11,609 days. This stuck out immediately to me because using the standard alphabetic order, Cleveland Browns sums to 169, which has these same digits. Using the S exception, Cleveland Browns equals 70. And this also stood out because the current owner of the Cleveland Browns, Jimmy Haslam, is in his 70th year since birth. And when Jim Brown died, Haslam was 70 days after his birthday. So 69 years, 70 days old. Very similar to the gematria of Cleveland Browns, 169 and 70. The number 169, which we pointed out, significant to Cleveland Browns. Notice how 169 is directly connected to the number 13, because 13 squared is 169. Measuring from Jim Brown's last birthday to the date of his death was a span of exactly 13 weeks. In reverse reduction, NFL equals 13. This means Brown also died a span of 91 days after his birthday. Well, 91 is the ordinal value of Brown's. 91 ordinal. Dead 91 days after his birthday. If we instead look at the reverse alphabetic order, Brown's equals 71. Jim Brown was inducted into the NFL Hall of Fame in the year 71. Now, the reason I point that out is because Jim Brown died one day after he turned 1,047 months old. And in Latin Gematria, Hall of Fame equals 147. And you got to say, it's intriguing that Brown's last full year alive was in 2022, when his full name, James Nathaniel Brown, sums to 2022 in Latin Gematria. Now, if you measure from his birthday in that year, 2022, to his death, you get 1 year and 91 days. Perhaps it's worth noting that Hall of Fame also equals 191. But there's another significant angle to this that I want to talk about. Jim Brown wasn't just a legend on the field, but he was also well known and highly respected in many communities around the world for his work supporting the civil rights movement. Jim Brown played in the NFL from 1957 through 1965, which was the peak of the civil rights movement here in the United States. Wikipedia lists this as taking place from 1954 through 1968. This movement was solidified by the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964 and a subsequent passage in 1968. So the only time Jim Brown won an NFL championship with the Cleveland Browns was in the year 1964, with the Cleveland Browns defeating the NFL's Baltimore Colts. Now, 1964 was also the same year that the Civil Rights Act was passed. Consider how in reduction gematria, civil rights equals 64, just like the year of their championship. The Cleveland Browns were founded on a very, very nice date, June 4th. This is, of course, my birthday. But here we have the digits 6-4, June 4th, just like civil rights. The Browns, of course, play in Cleveland, Ohio. And notice how in reverse, Cleveland, Ohio sums to 64. 64 is the first multiple of 32. Jim Brown wore number 32 for his entire career. And the 1964 championship game was the 32nd NFL championship game. Also, Jim Brown was 32 years old when the civil rights movement ended in 1968. Let's take one more look at this civil rights movement. I thought the dates were very intriguing. First of all, this movement began on May 17th, which happens to be just one day before the death of Jim Brown, which was on May 18th, right? Well, Jim Brown's death didn't make any major news outlets until May 19th, or 5/19. And if you measure from the start of the civil rights movement to the end of the civil rights movement, you get 5,190 days. And again, we learned about the death of civil rights activist Jim Brown on 5/19, May 19th. Next up, we're going to talk about this story involving Harry and Meghan, who were reportedly in a chase with some paparazzi in New York City. Now, it was originally reported that this chase lasted 2 hours. Although there's no footage of it, there's not much, there's a lot of conflicting information on this. And I think it's pretty safe to say that what we witnessed here is simple news reporting by the numbers. While the two stories I looked at, I would look at those and probably think they were organic, unless some other evidence emerged. But here's a case where it feels like the news was just reporting a fake story by the numbers. Of course, I'm not the first person to build a Gematria calculator and notice synchronicities between our names and dates. This is something, some knowledge that's passed around elite circles and certainly practiced at high levels. So let's talk about this. May 16th of 2023, Harry and Meghan were, I guess, leaving some ball or gala or whatever rich socialites do, and they were chased by paparazzi in their Range Rover. They had to switch vehicles into a taxi, I guess. Read about it yourself. So why is the date May 16th so intriguing for this? Well, let's pull this up, May 16th. I want to first focus on the numerology of this date. 5 plus 16 plus 20 plus 23 gives us a sum of 64. Prince Harry is, of course, the son of Princess Diana, who died in a very similar incident when she and partner Dodi Fayed were being chased by paparazzi in Paris, France. In Gematria, Princess Di sums to 64, matching the date numerology of this incident. And if you measure from the date of the incident to Princess Diana's next birthday, you find that it was even 6 weeks and 4 days before her birthday. Now, Princess Di also has Gematria of 440. So does New York, New York, where Harry and Meghan's ordeal occurred. Even New York, when abbreviated NY, sums to 440. Not only did this date have 64 numerology, but it also had 44 numerology. And May 16th this year was one of those dates that synced up perfectly with the Gematria of kill. You'll see all the Gematria values of kill, including Hebrew, found in this date numerology. Princess Diana died on the date August 31st. August 31st is the 243rd day of the year and leaves 122 days on the calendar. When Prince Harry was chased in New York, he was 243 days after his birthday, or 122 days before his next birthday. Now, the reason this is particularly noteworthy is because Harry's next birthday will be his 39th birthday. In Latin Gematria, Princess Di sums to 390, or 39 in numerology. 39 is also a very significant number to New York. New York equals 39, so does NY in ordinal. New York City is often abbreviated NYC, which also is 39. And New York is called the Empire State. Empire equals 39. Also, for the historians in the chat, New York's first governor was George Clinton, who was born in the year 39. And the name George equals 39. And so does the name Clinton. 39. But the death of Princess Di in 1997 was very heavily synced to numbers of Prince Harry. Prince Harry is known as Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, which gives us an ordinal value of 304. Princess Di passed away 304 days before her next birthday. Notice how she died on a date with numerology of 155 and 65. Well, that stands out because on its own, Duke of Sussex equals 155 and 65. Harry's wife's name is Rachel Meghan Markle. In the alphabetic order, her name also equals 155. As far as the 65, she died in Paris, France, which also is 65. Using capital letters, Paris, France yields the same 218 gematria as the word death in English Standard Gematria. English Standard is another denary cipher, very similar to Latin. However, Standard uses the current 26-letter alphabet A through Z. Well, on the date of this chase, Meghan Markle was exactly 2,180 weeks old, which would be alarming enough as it is. But if you look at today's date, Harry just turned 2,018 weeks old today. And think about how Princess Diana died in the year 1997. Well, in Latin Gematria, New York City, which is where Harry and Meghan were chased, sums to 1997. When Princess Diana passed away, she was 13,210 days old. And this is a really important number. In numerology, the 0 is dropped. So this represents the number 1321. Let's take a look at this. 1321 is also a prime number, and it's the 216th prime number. For those of you wondering why Harry married a mixed American instead of a traditional royal bride, this has everything to do with the death of his mother. Again, his mom had this 1321 in her age, the 216th prime number. Meghan Markle was born on August 4th, which is the 216th day of the year. Using the reverse alphabetic order, her name, Meghan Markle, equals 216. When Prince Harry was born, he was known as Prince Henry of Wales. Prince Henry of Wales also sums to 216. This brings us to the word chase. The word chase sums to 216 in Sumerian. And this brings us to the next part of this decode. The number 216 is 6 times 6 times 6. Now, just think about this, right? 2 times 3 is 6. And you do this 3 times. So 6 times 6 times 6. It's the 6th cube number. New York has Sumerian gematria of 666. Prince Harry's full name is Henry Charles Albert David. And check out how his name equals 1,666. In ordinal, his name also equals 234. And that's interesting because when you add 234 to its inverse, 432, you get a sum of 666. But this 234 is important for another reason. Henry Charles Albert David, 234. Measuring from the birthday of Princess Diana to the birthday of Harry's wife, Meghan Markle, you get 20 years and 34 days. So hopefully this makes the royal family make a little more sense, why they do things as they do. Now, the number 666 is also a triangular number. So this means if you add up every number 1 through 36, you get a sum of 666, and this number is, of course, 3 6s. The word chase sums to 36 in ordinal, and measuring from the birthday of Meghan Markle to the birthday of Harry, you get exactly 3 years and 6 weeks. Now, What's also significant is that Princess Di died at the age of 36. She also died 61 days after her birthday. In Gematria, there's a very significant method called satanic Gematria. Notice how the phrase satanic Gematria sums to 666 in this cipher. This cipher begins on 36, which is connected to 666. This cipher ends on 61, which is the 18th prime, and 18 is the sum of 6 plus 6 plus 6. So how interesting that Princess Di dies at the age of 36 years and 61 days old, all connected to 666. Well, now, Diana would currently be 61 years old. Notice how the word chase equals 18, which is 6 plus 6 plus 6. And the number 18 is coded into all of these names. Meghan Markle equals 108, ordinal. Henry Charles Albert David, 108, reduction. Prince Henry of Wales, 108 with the S exception. And this chase in New York happened a span of 108 days before the anniversary of Diana's death. A number that's highly connected to 666 is 33, and this is obvious in Gematria alone. 33 equals 66 and 60, or 666. 33 also has matching ordinal Gematria with both 666 and 666s. Well, the number 33 is connected to 226 in Gematria. And on the date of this chase, Diana would have been 22,600 days old. Notice how New York, New York has matching Gematria with 33. And in reduction, New York equals 33. Meghan Markle was a span of 11 weeks and 3 days before her birthday. Of course, 11 times 3 is 33. But check out how Meghan Markle's name connects to the name of the tunnel where Diana died. Princess Diana died in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, which is just the best French I've ever spoken, but I thought it was pretty interesting that this tunnel sums to 113 and 331. The name Rachel Meghan Markle equals 331, just like the name of the tunnel. And this 113 is found not only in the name of the tunnel, but also Diana's full name, 113. So did this really go down just like they reported it? Of course not. And there's a lot of suspicious things about Diana's death to begin with. All right, next up, we're going to actually talk about two news stories that are connected to one another. First off, we're going to look at this story about Phillies pitcher Matt Strahm, who was ejected from a game and fined simply for standing on the field for the national anthem. Well, he wouldn't sit down after the national anthem was over. He and former teammate Cutter Crawford did a little game of chicken, and they stood out on the field for so long that they had to delay the game, and they ejected both players. What's particularly interesting about this is that the name Strahm reminded me of Hank Strahm. Now, I didn't mention this in the original post, but when you think of significant figures in American sports, guys with the names Strahm or Strahm, this is probably the first that comes to mind. Now, Hank Strahm was the winning coach in Super Bowl IV with the Kansas City Chiefs. In Super Bowl IV, the Kansas City Chiefs defeated the Minnesota Vikings, who were quarterbacked by Joe Kapp. Well, Joe Kapp died on May 8th, which is the same day I made this post on Matt Strahm. So we'll talk about the death of Joe Kapp after this, but I thought this was interesting that we had these two stories basically back-to-back days. So, let's talk about this. Matt Strahm plays for the Phillies, and this game was, of course, in the city of Philadelphia. Now, Philadelphia is a significant place that's connected to the national anthem. In the city of Philadelphia, there's something called the Betsy Ross House. Now, Betsy Ross is the name of the woman who sewed the first ever American flag. The American flag is, of course, nicknamed the Star-Spangled Banner, which is the name of our national anthem. So the fact that this occurred in Philadelphia should give pause to anyone who's paying attention. The date of this incident was May 6th, or 6/5, as the date is written internationally. This was also the same date as King Charles' coronation. And in my last Super Stream, I talked about how the coronation of King Charles was connected to the United States of America. Notice how both Philadelphia and Matt Strahm sum to 65, just like the date of this incident. We're currently in the year 2023. The Star-Spangled Banner sums to 223 in the alphabetic order. Notice how the city of Philadelphia sums to 223 using the reverse alphabetic order. And in ordinal, Philadelphia sums to 101. 101 is the reverse value of the name Betsy Ross. Betsy Ross giving us a 101. Now, if we exclude the word the, which seems to be a rule, particularly in light of the fact that Star-Spangled Banner is 666 in Latin. But notice how Star-Spangled Banner sums to 190 in ordinal. And the Star-Spangled Banner is the national anthem of the United States. The United States also sums to 190. On the date of this incident where Matt Strahm got ejected, he was 190 days before his next birthday. If you include the end date, he was also 191 days before his birthday. And using that same cipher, the alphabetic order, Philadelphia Phillies sums to 191. Star-Spangled Banner, as I mentioned, also sums to 666 in Latin Gematria. The number 666 has ordinal Gematria of 275. Now, that's important because the other man who got ejected from this game, a former teammate of Strahm's, Cutter Crawford, notice how he was exactly 27 years and 5 weeks old on the date of this game. Furthermore, Crawford was also born 275 days before Betsy Ross's birthday. Betsy Ross, born on New Year's Day or January 1st. Betsy Ross, 101, born on January 1st, just like Philadelphia. January 1st, written 1-1. Using the reduction method, American flag sums to 54. The date of this incident with the American flag fell on a date with 54 numerology. But what's also interesting is that May 6th is also the date that leaves 239 days on the Gregorian calendar. The Betsy Ross House has an address of 239 Arch Street. Betsy Ross would have been 239 years old when Matt Strahm was born. Using the alphabetic order, the name Betsy Ross sums to 142. Well, that stands out because measuring from the birthday of Matt Strahm to the birthday of Cutter Crawford, you get a span of 142 days. This 142 is also found in the Gematria of the United States of America. The United States of America sums to 1042. The United States of America also equals 1602. Matt Strahm was born 1602 days before Cutter Crawford. Again, these two men were ejected from the same game. 162 is also a major baseball number. Of course, each team plays 162 games a year. Major League Baseball, baseball, and MLB, all with Gematria of 162. But not only were these men born 1602 days apart, but their birthdays were also a span of exactly 229 weeks apart. And the number 229 sticks out because Betsy Ross's full name, Elizabeth Grissom Ross, sums to 1229. And there you have that 229. Let's also appreciate that Betsy Ross's full name is 99. United States of America equals 99. The U.S. began with 13 colonies. The original flag that Betsy Ross sewed had 13 stars and 13 stripes. 13 also equals 117. And Betsy Ross's full name sums to 117. Finally, notice how Matt Strahm wears number 25 for the Philadelphia Phillies. That's interesting because not only does Strahm equal 25, but Philadelphia equals 205. And when he was ejected for his shenanigans on the field, he was exactly 25 weeks after his birthday. The name Betsy Ross has Latin gematria of 907, like 97, the 25th prime number. And notice how this game fell 97 days after the anniversary of Betsy's death. This was also, actually you see the number 97 there twice. If you measure from her birth, or from the anniversary of her death and the total number of days since her death. So what a cool little, I guess you could call this a ritual on the field. I try not to use the word ritual too often, as it does appear that a lot of numerology we see manifest is organic, but I mean, who knows? This is something that seems to be more prevalent at a college level. I can't say I've ever heard of this happening in the big leagues. So indeed, it does seem like it was staged, but you never know. So once again, that guy's name was Strahm. And this brings us to Super Bowl IV champion Hank Strahm. Hank Strahm curiously died on Independence Day, America's birthday, back in the year 2005. And we just talked about how the number 25 was connected to Strahm in Philadelphia. But really the big thing here is that he died on Independence Day. And this is all about, you know, the Star-Spangled Banner, the United States. So just to repeat the connection, Strahm won Super Bowl IV against the Vikings, and the Vikings were led by quarterback Joe Kapp, who died just 2 days after this national anthem ritual in the NFL. Joe Kapp died on the 8th of May, which is the date written 8/5 internationally. Joe Kapp was 85 years old. And he died 85 days after the most recent Super Bowl. In reduction, 85 is the value of National Football League. Now, this past Super Bowl was won by the Kansas City Chiefs. And once again, Joe Kapp only played in one Super Bowl ever during his career. And that was Super Bowl IV, which was against the Kansas City Chiefs. So the Chiefs won Super Bowl IV and the most recent one. Joe Kapp played most of his years with the Vikings, and the Vikings play in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Well, in 2018, Minnesota hosted its first ever Super Bowl, and that game was won by Philadelphia, the same city where the whole national anthem thing just took place. The Philadelphia Eagles also lost the most recent Super Bowl to the Kansas City Chiefs. Remember, the Phillies lost last year's World Series as well. Now, in the Super Bowl that occurred in Minnesota, the Eagles defeated the Patriots. And notice how Joe Kapp, after leaving the Minnesota Vikings, here he played for the Minnesota Vikings for three seasons. Well, then he went to the Patriots for 1 year after that. So we see this strange connection between all these teams. The Vikings, the Eagles, the Chiefs, and now even the Patriots. Measuring from the anniversary of the Minnesota Super Bowl to the death of Joe Kapp was 93 days. Minneapolis, Minnesota equals 93, and the city sits on the 93rd meridian. Notice how Minnesota Vikings also equals 93. The stadium that hosted the game was called U.S. Bank Stadium, which equals 930. So Joe Kapp died on the date, May 8th. On May 8th, back in 2018, which was the same year that the Vikings hosted the Super Bowl, a man named James Paxton threw a no-hitter for the Seattle Mariners. And this is such a deep web of connections, it's hard for me to quantify with numbers, but you can see the immense synchronicity here. The reason this no-hitter was so significant, and I blogged about this back in 2018, is because earlier that year, James Paxton was throwing some pregame warm-ups out in the outfield when a bald eagle landed on his shoulder. And James Paxton wears number 65. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, Philadelphia equals 65. Remember how the eagle was also the name of the lunar lander. Now, 2018 and 2023 share a strong mystical significance because this is the Hebrew gematria of moon and the moon. So the word for Hebrew, the word the in Hebrew, is basically worth 5. So moon equals 218, while the moon equals 223. So here we have another connection between 2018 and 2023. The moon landing, the eagle, right? All right, so let's try to connect this a little bit more. James Paxton threw his no-hitter on May 8th, the same date that Joe Kapp died. And that was 93 days after Super Bowl 52, which was won by Philadelphia. Notice how Philadelphia Eagles equals 93 in reverse reduction. In ordinal, Philadelphia Eagles equals 150. When the eagle landed on James Paxton's shoulder, it was 150 days after his birthday. That also happened 60 days after the Eagles won the Super Bowl, and James Paxton equals 60. Now, just 2 days after the death of Joe Kapp, James Paxton made his debut for the Boston Red Sox. And think about this, because the Boston Red Sox were the other team that was involved with the national anthem riddle and Matt Strahm. Boston, also, the same city where the Patriots play. When James Paxton threw his no-hitter in 2018, it was by a score of 5-0. And notice how James Paxton, he's a Canadian, and he threw his no-hitter in Toronto, which is the only MLB City that's in Canada. So that game ended 5-0, and Joe Kapp died 50 days after his birthday. Think about how the bald eagle is the national bird of America, which has 50 states. Bald eagle and America both equal 50. And after Super Bowl IV, which was won by Hank Strahm, it took Kansas City 50 years to win another Super Bowl. Kansas City also equals 50. And I think Chiefs equals 50 also. Right? Chiefs equals 50 just like Kansas City. It took them 50 years to win another Super Bowl. The 50th prime number is 229. And when Hank Strahm died on July 4th, it was the 229th anniversary of the United States. Remember this number because Matt Strahm and Cutter Crawford were born exactly 229 weeks apart, a number found in the gematria of Betsy Ross's full name. So there's a little bit more here that's definitely worth checking out. The name Joseph Robert Kapp in gematria has the same 237 value as Minneapolis, Minnesota. And the Super Bowl that he played in was lost by a score of 23-7. 23-7, just like Joe Kapp's full name and Minneapolis, Minnesota. Well, you may recall that this past NFL season, the Vikings opened up their schedule against the Packers, and the Vikings won by a score of 23-7, which I actually did a whole blog post on, right? It's the same score as the first Super Bowl they lost. Now, when the Packers and Vikings played to open the NFL season, it was 3 days after the death of Queen Elizabeth. And the Queen died on opening day of the NFL season, the prior Thursday. Notice how the name Queen equals 237? So does Charles, 237. And if you measure from the date that the Vikings beat the Packers 23-7 to the coronation of King Charles this past week, you find it was 237 days later. This is a really long post on Joe Kapp. I'll spare you the rest, but that 237 sync was really interesting. All right, so we talked about a little bit about pro wrestling to kick this video off with the death of Billy Graham. Excuse me while I take an obnoxiously annoying sip of coffee. Thanks for putting up with that. Now I want to talk about the 2018 death of a very famous professional wrestler whose career was cut tragically short by a whole wealth of injuries suffered in the ring. And I personally have not seen many Dynamite Kid matches, but this wrestler is held in very high esteem by a lot of current wrestlers, as he really helped develop the modern style of wrestling, high-flying but also strong. And I thought it was interesting that Dynamite Kid died in December of 2018. Now, he did die on his birthday. We'll talk about this. But when I saw this date, it dawned on me. This was less than a month before the founding of All Elite Wrestling. All Elite Wrestling's flagship program is called Dynamite. And Dynamite began airing less than a year after the death of the Dynamite Kid. So I thought, there must be some numbers connecting these two, and I was pretty blown away by what I found. First, we start with the gematria of Dynamite Kid's real name. His common name was Tom Billington. Notice how Tom Billington has matching 189 gematria with Tony Khan, who was the founder of All Elite Wrestling. And when Tony Khan founded AEW, he was 1,890 weeks old, a number which contains the same 4 digits as his name in both standard and reverse standard gematria. Dynamite Kid was one half of the tag team the British Bulldogs with his partner, the British Bulldog, Davey Boy Smith. Notice how British Bulldogs sums to 177. AEW Dynamite also equals 177 reverse. And I always thought it was interesting that Dynamite originally aired on the TNT network. And whenever you see Dynamite in cartoons, you always see the letters TNT on it. In Gematria, AEW Dynamite sums to 60 in reverse reduction and 720 in Sumerian. Why is that interesting? When Dynamite Kid died, he was exactly 60 years or 720 months old. The 72 is also found in the Gematria of Tom Billington, whose ring name was the Dynamite Kid, which equals 720 in reverse satanic. The Dynamite Kid was perhaps best known for performing his famous finisher, the diving headbutt, which is a move that actually many people believe led to his injuries throughout his career. Notice how the move headbutt also sums to 720. The Dynamite Kid was born on December 5th, or 12/5, and then he died on the date 12/5. Dynamite equals 125 in reverse. And when he died, it was 1 month and 25 days after Tony Khan's birthday, October 10th. There's even more syncs. When you write out All Elite Wrestling, it sums to 203 or 23. In reverse, the Dynamite Kid equals 230 or 23. AEW Dynamite debuted 2 months and 3 days before the anniversary of the Dynamite Kid's death. That's also 9 weeks and 1 day. And in ordinal, Dynamite equals 91. Notice how the name of his move, Headbutt, also sums to 27. AEW was founded 27 days after the death of Tom Billington. The 27th prime number is 103, which connects to All Elite Wrestling. And just check out this founding date, January 1st, or 1/1. In reduction, AEW equals 11. Dynamite equals 1009. Thomas Billington equals 190, and it was January 1st of the year 19 when AEW was founded. 19 was also the reduced numerology of Billington's death. Finally, he was born on a date with numerology of 31, and the first episode of AEW Dynamite aired 301 days after his death. Notice how All Elite equals 31, and Wrestling equals the 31st prime number. All right, a couple more things we're going to look at before I wrap this stream up today. I was watching some video on eccentric characters in baseball. And this guy was on the list, Mark Fidrych. And I found this guy to be very endearing and lovable. Out of all the quirky players in Major League Baseball, this guy might take the cake, as he was commonly seen talking to himself, talking to the baseball, doing his own groundskeeping work on the mound. And as a result of his antics, he became a very popular pitcher in Detroit, with the stadium selling games out when he would play. Now, I decided to look up Mark Fidrych because he was so interesting, and found that he actually passed away back in 2009. And when I read about his death, I found that he died while he was working on his dump truck. Now, this stuck out immediately to me Back in September of last year, I made a post on the organic matrix because my uncle got in a car crash with a dump truck, and his girlfriend passed away as a result of the accident. Now, that accident fell on a date that had matching numerology with truck and dump truck. Earlier in 2022, I did a post on the death of Steelers quarterback Dwayne Haskins, who was struck by a dump truck while walking on the freeway. And the story about my uncle had all sorts of connections to the story about Dwayne Haskins. Now, Dwayne Haskins was killed in Florida. My uncle's ex-wife and her daughter live in Florida. His other ex-wife is named Mickey, and of course, Disney World is in Florida. But my uncle's crash was right outside of a small airport called Clearwater Ranch Airport. And this was in Wisconsin. Whereas Clearwater is the name of a city in Florida. So there were all these connections with dump truck crashes between my family and Dwayne Haskins. And this is, again, something I chronicled last year on this blog and on this channel. Now, one thing I missed is that the victims of both of those incidents, Dwayne Haskins and Linda Miller, both of their names summed to 54 in reduction. And 54 is the ordinal and reverse sum of the word dump, 54. This number also appeared in the death of Mark Fidrych, who was born in the year 54 and would go on to die at the age of 54. Fidrych was a baseball player, and notice how baseball, a game where, it takes 54 outs to complete a game, baseball equals 54 in ordinal and reverse reduction. Using the reverse alphabetic order, dump truck sums to 116. Not only does the name Mark Fidrych equal 116, but his last name, Fidrych, sums to 116 in reverse. The number 116 turned upside down is 911. The phrase ritual human sacrifice is 911, and also 329. He died in Northborough, Massachusetts, which also equals 329. With capital letters, Northborough, Massachusetts equals 656. And on the date he died, Mark Fidrych was a span of exactly 656 months old. Now, I want to be clear, just because I put out the Gematria of ritual human sacrifice, that doesn't necessarily mean I believe this man was killed or murdered. I'll talk about this a little bit more, but it seems apparent to me that words and phrases that carry the vibrations of death are far more likely to appear in incidents of death. I'll expand on this in a little bit, don't worry. Next, I want to point out the gematria of truck. In ordinal and reverse, truck sums to 73 and 62. The name Mark Fidrych equals 62, and Fidrych equals 73. These numbers are also found in the gematria of sacrifice, 73 and 62. Sacrifice also has matching 46 reduction gematria with Fidrych. And when Fidrych was killed by his truck, it was on a date with numerology of 46 and 19. And notice how the word truck sums to 19. Mark Fidrych won the American League Rookie of the Year in 1976. He debuted on a date with 19 numerology, 420 of 76. That year, he would go on to win 19 games before winning Rookie of the Year. And when he retired, he had a total of 19 losses. Notice how Mark Fidrych lived for 19,967 days. And I point this out because the 19th prime number is 67. 67, also the gematria of blood sacrifice or ritual sacrifice. I'm sorry, human sacrifice. Couple of 67s there. Numbers also appear to explain why the Tigers were a good fit for Mark Fidrych. Notice how Tigers equals 84 in reverse. Fidrych's full name, Mark Stephen Fidrych, sums to 84 reduction and 201 ordinal. 201 is the Latin value of the word tiger. Tiger also sums to 76 and 32. Mark Fidrych won Rookie of the Year in the year 76, which is when he debuted for the Tigers. And Fidrych had birth numerology of both 76 and 32. Mark Fidrych died exactly 1 week or 7 days before the 33rd anniversary of his Major League debut. And think about how 1 week has a mystical connection to 33. In the Bible, the 33rd verse of Genesis, God rests on the 7th day of creation, and both 1 week and 7 days equal 33. 33, a number of ritual human sacrifice. The name Mark Fidrych and Mark Stephen Fidrych also have fascinating prime number connections in Latin. Here we get the 115th and the 248th prime number. These numbers found in both killing, human sacrifice, and truck. Now, for many years on this channel, I would have said that, yeah, this guy was probably sacrificed or killed. For those of you who saw my last super stream, I opened it up by talking about the passing of my cousin on my dad's side. And it kind of struck me because on this channel, I had been talking about the death of one of my cousins on my mom's side. And I posted that video exactly 1 month before my other cousin died. A quick glance at the numerology of my cousin April, who died in the month of April. Her age connected perfectly to the date. It was in the year 2023 on the date 22/4. And these numbers were found not only in her age, but also the number of weeks between her birthday and mine. And when you write out April 22nd, you even get 223. Now, one thing I didn't mention in this decode, because it's not really relevant to what happened, is that if you measure from the date she died to my next birthday, her death fell 43 days before my 38th birthday. Her death was also exactly 43 weeks well, I guess it wasn't exact. It was 43 weeks in 1 day. But anyways, that was 43 weeks before her 43rd birthday. So 43 and 38 kept coming up. And the word killing sums to 43 and 38. In English gematria, killing sums to 155. And that matches the ordinal value of her name, 155. And I was actually born on the 155th day of the year. So does this mean that this was a killing ritual? Well, no. You know, the family, we know what happened. There were, you know, she had her struggles, and this wasn't the first time that, sorry if I'm not the best at talking about this, but, you know, she had a lot of issues, and, there's nothing suspicious about what happened. That's all I'm going to say. Didn't mean to get all emo for a second, but that's how this world works. And another thing, in regards to the organic side of numerology, I want to touch on the running of the Kentucky Derby this year to wrap this video up. Down in the description below, you'll find my video on last year's Kentucky Derby. And I consider that to be one of my best videos. It's so interesting. There's so many angles on this. And the fact that horse races have the same type of numerology as human sports, to me, is one of the best pieces of evidence that numerology manifests organically. And perhaps what we're seeing on the sports fields is not quite as rigged by man as we think. Now, I understand the argument. You could say, well, horse racing is rigged, right? There's been many scandals throughout history. And all you'd have to do is have all the jockeys run slower than the one horse that needs to win. And I understand that argument. Sure, that's possible. But, when you look at the times of the Kentucky Derby winners throughout history, I want you to look at these times and see how incredibly consistent they are. You see a lot of 203, 201, and 202. Those are pretty much the only times you see. Occasionally there's an outlier, 2 minutes or 204, but it's typically within a second or two of the same time. Now, if you're going to try and tell me that, the winning horse of the Kentucky Derby was selected before the race, and every single year they get that horse to run 2 minutes and 2 seconds, that's too impressive for me to believe. If you take 20 horses and you look at the fastest time of those horses, you're going to get a much, much, much more consistent number than if you picked one horse and then timed that horse throughout the race. These times would not be this consistent. Now, this isn't to say that the races aren't rigged, but if they are, perhaps there's more discreet means by which this is happening. Maybe something like magic. And in my video last year, I talked about the idea of magic a little bit. I really do think there's some magical element. And after the race, I called last year's Kentucky Derby a Jesuit magic ritual. And this was all connected to Sonny Bono, whose full name was Salvatore Philip Bono. And the middle name Philip stands out with Sonny Bono because Philip means lover of horses. The first name Salvatore is what appears on the Jesuit emblem. So the Jesuit order has this emblem, IHS. Jesus Hominum Salvator, or Savior. Now, I pointed this out several times. I said, I think it's a Jesuit magic ritual as far as what happened. And how strange is it that this year, the name of the winner was Mage, and Mage's sire was Good Magic. And the horse that Mage had to pass down the final stretch of the Derby was named Two Phils. Now, this race was on the same day as King Charles' coronation. And King Charles took over for Queen Elizabeth, whose husband was named Philip. So, this isn't numerology. This is just me kind of talking about how this is all panning out. By the numbers, nonetheless. So, this year's Kentucky Derby was the 149th Kentucky Derby. And it happened the same day that King Charles III and Queen Camilla were crowned. Notice how that sums to 149. Charles in reverse, also 149. When you write the number 149 out, you get 234 and 279. Charles III equals 234. Charles Philip Arthur George equals 279. The name of the winning horse, Mage, has a lot of overlap with King Charles' various names. But the most significant part of this whole riddle to me lies with the name of the jockey. The jockey who won this year was named Javier Castellano. And the name Castellano means castle through Latin. And that's interesting because castles typically house kings. And this race was on the same day that we got a new king. In fact, the name Javier translates to new house. So we get a new king moving to a new part of the house. And yeah, if you look at the birth numerology of Castellano, you get 30, 57, and 69. Charles equals 123 and 30. Castellano was born on October 23rd, or 123, a date with 30 numerology. Charles III also equals 57 and 69, and Castellano had birth numerology of 57 on the 69th, the date leaving 69 days. So, I mean, again, maybe I'm wrong, you know. I always leave the possibility of me being wrong on this channel. Maybe they've figured something really, really special out with horses on how to get the right horse to win these races, but to me, that's just a bit of a stretch. You know, when you see how things pan out in your own life by the numbers, there's nothing crazy about thinking the same thing is happening to people on television. At least occasionally, right? All right, so I don't have much more to add to that. I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap this super stream up. It's been a doozy, but a good one. Thanks to everybody who jumped in, whether you're watching live or archived. Please feel free to check the description below if you'd like to support this work and keep future super streams running, as well as the standard decodes I do on this channel. To everyone who supported thus far, much appreciated. Much love. And yeah, that'll do it. We'll talk to you next time. See ya.